Good afternoon, and welcome. So we're going to start in a minute. So do stay with us, please. Just a few adjustments, and while waiting for everybody to be here, I'm going to ask you to be just a little bit more patient, please, and welcome on our side. Good afternoon. I'm going to give you some instructions on how to use the platform, although I'm sure that most of you know it. Yet I'd like to give you some technological tricks and tips. So we're already more than 90 participants connected so far. So may I start the session? So we're gonna adjust further technical issues as we go on. So welcome. My name is Simona De Giorgio. I'm from the Chamber of Commerce of Turin, and I'm the coordinator of this platform called the Torino Social Impact. Is the ecosystem of impact economy and the local territory. And within Torino Social Impact, many projects were launched on impact economy. One of them being the one we're gonna discuss today, named Torino Impact Journalism. It is an initiative, a path aimed at exploring the role of journalism in the impact economy era. We're working on it day by day thanks to different collaboration with different subjects interested in this subject. And within and chaining up with a panel that we held at the book fair, we launched this cycle of webinars in order to have a better insight into impact journalism. Today, we're dealing with the very first webinar. There will be more from September to November 2024. So thanks to the collaboration with the Association of Piedmontese Journalists, we could also have the support of the Italian Impact, Italian Network for Impact Economy. So may I now give you some technical tips, as I said before, as for the how to use the platform. So first and foremost, our speakers will be more Italian and English. So we do have English and Italian languages because we do have simultaneous interpreters. So please select the language you prefer. After our speakers, we do have a Q&A sessions. So do use Q&A just for questions and chat for your comments. Please, journalists, rename your account with your name and surname. That's mandatory, actually, for the Association of Journalists to recognize your training credits. So without much ado, may I thank Lorena Di Maria, the coordinator of Torino Social Impact, Rafael Zanotti, who is the coordinator for La Stampa of Torino Social Impact and Torino Impact Journalists, the speakers, the guests, experts in solution journalism that will be chaining up, giving us their take on solution journalism, and Stefano Arduini, who will be the facilitator of this session. So thank you very much indeed. Stefano, you have the floor. All right, I forgot to open up my mic. So thank you, and welcome everybody again on my behalf. Thanks, Torino Social Impact, because today we have the opportunity to have fruitful discussions on our profession. So the title today is Foundations and Principles of Solution Journalism. We have international guests that will be very helpful for our exchange. So what should I say to open up this line of seminars? It is an ideal moment to discuss a drop of interest from the audience on journalism and newspapers to understand what works and what doesn't, and to try and see what this crisis is originated from. Very often we say that there's a new flow of contents, and that's why traditional newspapers are living a crisis. So online platforms have found a new form for this traditional profession, and the difference between traditional journalism and news, so to say, social networks and the audience, which is mainly youth, using social network is so far from each other. We haven't found a balance yet, but today we try to see it from another angle, not only from the device point of view and platforms in general, uh, yet on the core of the content. So what stories we recount. And in my opinion, this is an instrumental exercise for those who are in these professions like us. Instrumental for us to understand how future journalism could work. So may I wrap up my introduction by thanking the four speakers that have accepted to be here today. But before giving them the floor, may I give you some figures? On average, at least in Italy, every year newspapers lose more or less 10% of their readers, multiplied by several years. You can understand the depth of the crisis journalism is living. So we tried to extract some figures from Oxford University on European journalism. I just throw some figures there and then we will analyze them. So most of readers are skeptical, also to say, skeptical about the fact that the news that are spread out are just chosen by algorithms. As you know, the bubbles of algorithms foresee or indicate probable interest of users based on the interest expressed on their research in the internet. Of course, this is the bias, and it is a bias mechanism that satisfy only 30% of the readers, because readers do want to be free when choosing content. So 30% is diminishing, it's decreasing. So we have less and less readers satisfied by this kind of mechanism. In 2016, the trend has improved of 6% as compared to 2015. Another interesting figure, we have just witnessed European elections, and Italy, unfortunately, had less than 50% of the voters to go and put their ballot. So this means that there are less people participating in the public debate. So social networks were not present when most of these electors were young. So we have less people interested, less people convinced of the good work of algorithm, and less people starting from news to go and look for other information. Trust in newspapers is dropping. We have a -2% in the last month. In Greece, is less than 19% of the population trusting the news spread over through journalism. That's terrible. We are still at 69%, but with a downtrend. And another interesting point, and that will be top figures, 36% out of 95,000 respondents in 47 countries. So it's a relevant survey. So 36% of those respondents just avoid news. So they just use a social network for anything but news. So in general, news in general, or some specific news like COVID or Ukraine war and so on and so forth. So for those of you who are familiar with Google and the other internet giants, know that some subjects are just unfavored in social networks. So you write less about it, and so you become less and less interesting for readers. So that's a vicious cycle. How can we get out of this vicious cycle? We need to give more complex accounts with a narrative full of details, having direct relationship with the audience and the readers. So trying to turn these bubbles into communities, because you know that there is a community interested in what you write. And then last but not least, solution journalism. So this could also be a solution for journalism in general, just to revive our profession. May I leave the floor now, without much ado, to Jody Jackson, author and founder of News Literacy Lab. Good morning, good afternoon. So the lab has this activity in its core, so educating and informing new generations to have a flavor for journalism, so that they can learn what happens in the world, just for them to be aware of what happens and to become adults able to make informed choices. So, Jody, may I ask you, you see there's a drop in the interest of readers in journalism. So what's your take on that? And what about the old mood of have a negative bias is the origin of it?
It's great to be here, to be able to speak to you about solutions journalism and the negativity bias in the news. I am not a journalist myself, so I come into this really from the perspective of the consumer. So I am one of the many people who over the years the news has actually turned away. I became a news avoider about 14 years ago, and it was solutions journalism that actually brought me back in to the news. So I just want to explain that in a little bit more detail. So I was always somebody who grew up watching the news, and sort of in my early 20s, I watched it every day. But by the time I was 22, I couldn't bear to watch the news anymore. It made me feel incredibly depressed about the world, really disappointed in humanity, and really frightened for my future. And I noticed that the overwhelming negativity that we have in the news, it was having a real impact on my mental health. So I had to switch off. So that was my solution. About 14 years ago, I decided to switch off. And my story isn't in any way unique. So this reflects something that we all know, but the industry hasn't fully addressed yet, which is the negativity bias is one of the leading causes of audience disengagement. And my work since, having founded the News Literacy Lab and teaching media literacy, is recognizing that the negativity bias in the news is also a key contributor to a misinformed worldview. And this is because the news doesn't report everything that goes on in the world. It reports everything that goes wrong in the world. And when we continuously prioritize stories of problems, failure, conflict, violence, disaster, and we don't provide any meaningful coverage on solutions and progress, it then means that the news doesn't mirror reality. It distorts it. And this huge imbalance actually creates a misguided perception that the world is continually getting worse. And that's what a lot of people think as a result. And thinking of the world in this way, that we're in a continual and perpetual state of decline, is not only inaccurate, but it can be harmful. So there is over a century's worth of research that shows the detrimental impact of the negativity bias on both our mental health and the health of our society, not least of all because it doesn't actually effectively engage us in rising to the challenges of our time. But in fact, it can actively disengage us. It can disengage people because of how hopeless it makes them feel. You see, the news creates this huge sense of urgency without any sense of agency. And so it leaves this feeling of hopelessness. But beyond this feeling, it can also make people feel anxious, make them feel depressed, fearful, and overwhelmed. And these feelings, rather than energize us, they psychologically drain us. So it leaves us to feeling not just hopeless, but also helpless about the future. And I just want to clarify, because I've mentioned disengagement, and I want to just clarify the two different types of disengagement, sorry, I should say, two different types of disengagement that the negativity bias creates. So the first is unconscious disengagement, and this happens just because people become desensitized. So another way of describing this kind of disengagement could be compassion fatigue or apathy. But in essence, people just stop caring. And the second form of disengagement, it's much more deliberate. Sorry, it's just asking me to confirm what language I'm speaking in. Let me just quickly confirm that. So the second type of disengagement is far more deliberate, and that's where people recognize that the news is making them feel bad, and so they actively switch off. And so I was one of these people. And what I want to share with you today is how I became re-engaged and how what I learned through this process has actually helped newsrooms rebuild lost audiences as well as develop new ones. You see, feeling depressed doesn't have to be the overriding side effect from being informed. So there are ways that we can engage with the news and feel more empowered, feel more connected to the world, and more capable to act within it. But if we're going to achieve that, we need a different story. So this isn't to say that the news needs to stop reporting on problems, but it needs to seriously report on solutions too. And I'm not talking about, lighthearted, uplifting, feel-good stories that just make us feel better. I'm talking about real, hard-hitting journalism that investigates progress and helps us understand how problems are effectively being dealt with, because this gives us critical information. If we can learn from how communities are successfully responding to problems, it helps us better identify and implement effective action, especially in areas where these problems aren't yet solved. And there is a real appetite for this kind of news. So a report from the BBC showed that 64% of under 35s want the news to provide solutions. And it was actually their top content request. And this is just one of the many data points that shows the potential for solutions journalism to engage audiences, because research has also shown that this type of news leads to longer time spent on articles compared to traditional news. It builds trust. Readers are more likely to read more articles from the same organization, and it enhances the willingness for readers to pay for content because they feel they get value from it, not just because it helps them stay better informed, but because it increases their levels of optimism, agency, resilience, connection, and hope. And the thing that's really important to stress about these feelings is they don't arise by denying or shielding ourselves from the world's problems. They arise when we allow ourselves to see what's possible in their presence. So it's not about ignoring problems, it's about including solutions. And it does, it activates hope, and it's something I'll talk a little bit about later. But hope can be underestimated as an emotion, as if it's something that's just there to make us feel better. But it's not. Hope is a critical psychological ingredient that we need to help us do better, And it has a powerful impact on driving positive social change. Because for people to want to solve a problem, they have to believe on some level that it is solvable. And when they do, they're better able to process negative information, and they're far more motivated to engage in action to actually make it better. But without hope, without that feeling that things can improve, or that certainty or belief, which you get, by the way, from witnessing evidence of success, without hope, you seed despair and you seed disengagement. Now, so often when I advocate for solutions journalism, the subtext is that I'm against problems-focused reporting, as if solutions is good and problems are bad. And that's not what this is about. It's just saying that we should also look beyond the problem to see what efforts are being made to solve it, and learn what progress is taking place so that we can actually learn from it. I know I keep saying it, but I really do need to emphasize that this isn't about ignoring problems. It's about how do we psychologically resource ourselves to be able to deal with them better. You know, we don't have to banish our more painful emotions, our uncomfortable emotions. We just have to balance them. So it's okay, and it's perfectly human to feel anger, fear, outrage, and worry about the problems that we face in the world. It's okay that we feel those feelings, and it's perfectly human. But what's not okay is that we only experience these feelings, because on their own, it leads to us feeling depressed, disempowered, and hopeless. It doesn't produce energy, it drains it. But if we combine these feelings, of anger, outrage, fear, with feelings like hope, resilience, connection, and agency, that combination energizes us, it activates us. You see, energy comes from opposites. So if you think about a magnetic field, you have the north and the south pole, and that creates a charge. If you have a plug, you have the positive and negative charge, and it's that combination that creates energy. And it's the same combination that activates human beings too. If you have too much positive, you become pacified. If you have too much negative, you become paralyzed. But when you combine something like outrage with optimism, frustration with agency, fear with hope, you get charge, you get energy, and you can use that energy to take action. What we know from studying psychology is that doom and gloom is an incredibly outdated framework for storytelling. So with everything that we now know about positive psychology, about growth mindset, about human agency, about motivation, everything that we know about human potential and human performance, negativity and visualization of worst-case scenarios does not work on its own. We need to expand the story to include solutions. What we now know is that solutions journalism is no longer just a niche. It is a necessity in modern news reporting. And we are at an important moment in news reporting. And what happens next matters. I truly believe that the news industry has the most incredible opportunity to be able to help people understand better the challenges that we face and mobilize us to take effective action against them. But to do this, you need to widen the lens on the world that you help us see. You need to tell us not just where the world is falling apart, but also where it's stepping up. This is how you engage people. This is how you inspire action. Because if you want to build a better world, you have to tell a better story. And that is my invitation for everybody here today, is to utilize solutions journalism as a tool to tell a better story and build a better world. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jody. Fantastic intervention. Let me underline just briefly that solution journalism is not merely journalism reporting on good news. It's a kind of journalism which goes hand in hand with the rest of news reporting, so that we can have a kind of exit strategy. We cannot stick to just reporting bad news and disasters and a lot of drama. So this is something that we must tackle, and which is actually a challenge for us. And that's something that struck me as well. You mentioned that under 35, so the audience of tomorrow, rather, the audience of today, well, all those young people are absolutely interested in that type of journalism and actually ask for it. They want it. I will now leave the floor to Tina Rosenberg, who is an absolute queen in journalism, working for the New York Times. Thank you very much for being here with us today. And she has theorized, in a way, solutions journalism, because in an article that was published on the 14th of November 2016 on the New York Times, she wrote that constant attention for journalism, on journalism for conditions which are apparently incurable, untreatable, actually paved the way for this great negativity to actually come across more and more. And this, in a parallel way, has been analyzed as part of the crisis of journalism. So Tina Rosenberg manages a network of journalists. This is something that has been having a great impact onto 25,000 colleagues, a fantastic approach. Therefore, I would like to ask Tina, what type of space do we see for solution journalism in a world which is actually led by algorithms? How do we select the news? Can this type of journalism be actually a remedy for the crisis of journalism? Can we win this battle against algorithms? Can you please define the perimeter for solution journalism? As of today, there are a couple of characteristics of typical features that might define it. What are they? Over to you.
Well, thank you very much. It's really an honor to be here, and I apologize for my voice today. I'm a little under the weather. So I totally endorse what Jody said. She puts it so well, and what she has to say is so important. So solutions journalism is simply journalism that covers how someone is responding to a problem and what results they're getting. It's not celebrating their response. It's not cheerleading for it or advocating for it. It's just reporting on it. So for example, if our city has a terrible problem, I'll give you an example. A paper in the state of Ohio, now it's asking me to confirm my language. I think I would like to speak in Estonian. Okay, here we go. A city in Ohio, it's Cleveland, their newspaper had reported several times on a problem with infant mortality that we have in the United States because of our excellent health system. And what it had never done before was look at how other cities had dealt with the problem. So for example, they did a series on infant mortality, looking at it in Black neighborhoods. But they also went to another city, Baltimore, Maryland, which is similar to Cleveland, and reported on a very successful program there called Be More for Healthy Babies that was lowering rates of infant mortality in Baltimore. And they looked in depth at how it worked, what was successful about it, what were the challenges it still has to face. That's very important. There's no such thing as a perfect solution, so don't claim there is, you'll have no credibility. Embrace the messiness of it and talk about the limitations. So they reported on what was going on in Baltimore and published that in several articles in Cleveland. And what ended up happening was Cleveland, people read those articles. They invited the leaders of the Baltimore program to come talk to Cleveland. They adopted that program, and they've been having the same success with it that Baltimore had. So that's an example of solutions journalism. What are people doing to try to solve a problem, and what results are they getting? It's not about good intentions. It's not about feel good. It's about results. So, I mean, I want to talk about the bias of journalism. And many people feel that journalism is biased. It's very hard to find people who don't feel that journalism is biased. But to me, the most toxic bias is the negativity bias. And the reason is, it's not just a problem that is characteristic of bad journalists. It's a problem that's characteristic of good journalists too. It is just the way the system works in journalism. Journalists say, it's not my job to burnish someone's reputation. We are very, very wary of writing anything that might be construed as praise or advocacy or cheerleading. And journalists understand that our audiences are tired of reading about problems. We're tired of writing about problems, but we don't know how to write about responses to problems in a way that gives us professional safety, in a way that allows us to know that we're not going to look soft or foolish or credulous rather. So at the Solutions Journalism Network, which is the network that Stefano talked about, that my co-founder and I, David Bornstein, we founded 10 years ago, and which is very active in Italy, and we'll hear from Assunta Corbo later on. She's our trainer here in Italy. We train journalists in ways to do these stories with professional safety and rigor. And once they realize that you can do it this way, and you don't have to just tell stories as if they were the solution to everything, that you can use nuance, you can say, here's what worked about it, but the data shows that there's still these problems and they're working on these problems, but there's these other problems. You just report on it, report what's good about it and what's bad about it. Then we've had a lot of interest in solutions journalism. And one other thing I would like to mention about the Reuters digital news report, which comes out every year, and which we've all cited as one of the sources of the information that people have tuned out from the news, largely because of the negativity bias. Last year, for the first time, Reuters asked the question in its surveys of news avoiders, what would make you tune back in? Not just why did you tune out, but what would bring you back into the news? And tops on the list was positive news, and second on the list was solutions journalism. Now, as journalists, we're kind of allergic to positive news. That is fluff for us. But the solutions journalism part, journalists can embrace. And Reuters commented that we are not certain that people understand the difference between positive news and solutions journalism, which I totally agree with. Even a lot of journalists don't understand that difference. They're just expressing a desire, as Jody said, to have news that doesn't make them feel so damn depressed. And we can provide that while reporting with rigor and high standards and impact. And that's what we hope that people will do with solutions journalism.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Tina Rosenberg. And now, we have been hearing quite a few aspects about solutions journalism, which is not an isolated impact approach, rather, which is connected to impact journalism, sorry. So I would now invite Peter Damgaard. I hope this is the right pronunciation for your surname, who is operational director at the institute he's working at. So please tell us something more about solutions journalism and impact journalism, active journalism, not any type of passive journalism, which is also connected to the way how our world is shaped. We must interact with our audience. So this is not anymore a top-down approach. Over to you, Peter.
Thank you so much, Stefano, and also thank you for inviting me. And it's a great honor to, share this stage with strong voices such as Tina and Jody. So thank you very much. Yeah, as mentioned, I represent something called the Constructive Institute, and I think I'll just share some slides because I think it makes it a whole lot easier. I hope you can all see my slides here. I just want to make sure that works all right. Is it okay?
It does work. We can see your
Perfect.
screen.
Perfect.
No worries.
Yeah, so the motivation for the Constructive Institute, which I represent, is some along the lines of what Tina and Jody was also mentioning. So we actually started back in 2017 with the mission of changing the global news culture. This is a reaction to some of the same trends that you are seeing. So we're seeing a declining interest in news. And as my co-panelists have both mentioned, we are seeing an increase in news avoidance. So of course, this gives a lot of cause for concern. And the good thing is, if we want to be on a positive note here, is that actually if we ask a lot of the journalists and also the audience out there, if they see any solutions to this, we actually have quite a good understanding of some of the things we need to address. So positive stories, I share Tina's concern, because if we just shift to positive stories, we run the same risk the same biases as with negativity. But what we know is that people want more in-depth journalism, explanatory journalism, solutions journalism, and inspirational stories. If you look at the second on the list, it's QA formats. And that is one of the things, that we are working with. So today you'll hear a lot of talking. So I will actually take the liberty of showing you a short explainer that actually sums up what we do instead of me just talking. So it will be a couple of minutes, and I hope you can all see it on your screens.
Today, millions of news stories will be produced, published, and consumed by our audiences. They will change the outcome of elections, what we buy, how we think and feel about ourselves and each other. But as the sheer volume of news rises, does quality follow? Perhaps along the way, we journalists took a wrong turn. We mistook attention for a sign of approval, creating fear and apathy. Because we once learned that if it bleeds, it leads. Some even say we sold our souls for clicks, for likes, serving up our vast, complex, fascinating world in bite-sized pieces, forgetting all the shades between black and white in the process. What about a journalism for tomorrow? Could our words be guided by curiosity and not just conflict? Could we focus on solutions and not just problems? Embrace and not shy away from the many nuances? Could our news stories help audiences see something new, help them build something constructive? Because the world doesn't need more news, it needs better news. We call this constructive journalism, and its time has come.
So basically, this is one summary of what we are doing. So while we fully share the work and ambitions of what Tina and the Solutions Journalism Network are doing, in our analysis, we also focus a lot on the general news culture. So we work with 3 core pillars. So our first pillar is focusing on solutions, which is basically what we would call solutions journalism. But we add a couple of other features to this analysis. So the second pillar is covering nuances. So in some of the very, very complex topics we face today, it's often portrayed in black and white. And we all know that very rarely you find the truth in the black and white. So we try and encourage people to be much more nuanced in their journalism. And the third pillar, which is probably right now the most important pillar, we say that we want to promote the democratic conversation. So in more recent years, we've seen how journalism can help push and actually motivate polarization in countries. And we feel that journalism has to play an active role in actually also trying to create a coherent public conversation, and that journalism can play a new role. So also to just address some of the myths that we also often face, both Jody and Tina has addressed some of them. But when we talk about constructive journalism, it's not to say that all other journalism needs to go. So we all know about breaking news. It's about what happens right now. It's about being fast. What happened? When did it happen? You know, we approach it with a dramatic voice, and we often play the role of a police officer. Then we have the pinnacle of journalism, which we often call investigative reporting. So when a scandal has occurred, we often want to know what actually happened, like what happened yesterday. The goal is to sort of uncover the mysteries, to uncover the hard cases, and we want to ask who and why did it happen. So very often we become sort of the critical prosecutor, and we try to identify the crooks and victims. Those two types of journalism are extremely important. What we argue is that we need a third type of journalism to add a layer on top of these existing kinds of journalism, and we call that constructive journalism. So it's about tomorrow. It's about inspiring journalism that can actually help push people in a certain direction. It's asking the questions what now and how. So the jury is more plays the role of a curious facilitator and tries to find solutions and best practice. So the way we work about it is three-pronged. So we have a pillar that focuses on bringing together new knowledge. So we do a lot of research, and I can talk more about that if any of you are interested. So we do development projects. Then we host conferences and do workshops. And then we have a very important piece, which we call New Role Models, where we run an international fellowship program. And just to finish off, my sort of approach to this is to say that I think if we haven't all sort of realized what are the important things we need to address here, it was actually highlighted by a recent ranking of global risks done by the World Economic Forum. And as you see right now, misinformation and disinformation actually tops the list. And even if you look ahead 10 years and people try to analyze what are the most important risks, we will still see misinformation, mis and disinformation high on the list. So I think we all have a serious problem that we need to address, and we hope that solutions journalism and constructive journalism can help be part of the solution. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Peter. Fantastic. I'll be right back with you because I can already see a few questions. And now, Alessia Giannoncelli, over to you, Impact Europe Research Director. She has been working on impact finance. Are you here with us? Yes. So welcome, first and foremost. I would ask you, since you are not a journalist, actually, you're a different professional figure, if you find it interesting, you know, to talk about impact journalism the way we have been doing today, from your viewpoint, what is the link here? What patches all those elements together? Thank you very much, Stefano. And thank you very much, Dorina Social Impact, for inviting me. When I saw the panel title, I thought, wow, that's cool. And after hearing Jody, Tina, and Peter, I am all the happier to be here with you today because there are quite a few extraordinary links that I can see amongst the different elements that have been touched upon today, considering what we do at the Impact Europe Institute. And as you said, Stefano, I represent the Impact Finance Network Europe-wide. And when we talk about impact economy, what do we mean? That's a type of economy where stakeholders try and have a positive impact onto society from a number of viewpoints at a social level, with ONGs, bodies from the third sector, impact investors who are actually the main actors in my community, and the you know, market builders like our networks and public bodies as well. Let's say that what we try and do is actually tell a story and tell something more about impact economy. So everything that we have been trying to do in terms of improving our communication skills can be connected to solutions journalism and impact journalism. When I started in the field 10 years ago, so research and content creation were my main fields back then, I realized that one thing is actually patching together, solid research elements. And a totally different thing is being able to actually effectively communicate all of that. I wrote hundreds and hundreds of pages, and then I realized that I wasn't conveying any message. So the importance of storytelling on the one hand, and on the other hand, the collaboration with magazines and institutions and organizations like yours, like Vita. And there is a kind of proliferation of magazines and newspapers that didn't exist 10 years ago, dealing actually with everything that we've been trying to talk about, so solutions and how investors, impact investors specifically, have been supporting solutions to the problems that we tackled. So this is a niche industry. So impact finance in Italy and Europe-wide hasn't become mainstream yet. And what we have been trying to do, which is connected to solutions journalism, is first of all, telling stories, as Jody and Tina said, without replicating them. What should be replicated is actually the solutions that are put forth. So if they were successful, it is of paramount importance to actually understand that they can be replicated elsewhere as well, trying to actually bring this field, which is ours, out of its niche. Because, after 10 years of impact investment, we are still in a corner, if you will. Even though we've tried to bring up those topics Europe-wide, we would like to reach a wider audience. So Impact Europe kicked off a partnership with the Financial Times 2 years ago. Generally, they don't deal with impact investments or impact invest in general. So what we did was trying to lead them and come up with a series to be published. Of course, they were also a key player here. Sorry, excuse me, Alessia. Sorry if I interrupt you because your connection broke. So I was saying messages that they were fully controlling. So the series was and is still fully managed by the Financial Times. We tried to brief their journalists so that they could fully understand what our messages would be and were meant to be, what type of narrative we wanted to convey. So let's say that that's one of the methods that we tried to put into place to make all of this a little bit more mainstream. So the beauty and the relevance of impact economy and impact investing. And then one last thing to go back to what Pisa was saying. When we talk about impact journalism, we must have a free and realistic type of journalism, thus mirroring democratic principles, which, of course, impact investing can support. So what is the role, as of now, that impact journalism can take on to help transfer those pieces of information? And on the other hand, how can impact investing help this type of journalism so that it can be more democratic and pluralistic? So maybe we should go back to that later on. Alessia, yes, before leaving the floor to the second panel, we have a few questions that were written into the chat. So let's try and answer all of them. Cosimo Guarini. So how can we patch together solutions journalism with the rest of the world, the wild, wild world of social media? How can we put them together? Tina briefly touched upon that. So I would like Peter to answer the question. Can you actually match solutions journalism with the social media reporting or social networks reporting?
So if the question is whether this kind of journalism can survive in sort of the attention economy, the answer is Luckily, to a large extent, yes, or at least we know that this has a better chance of surviving in the attention economy than a lot of the conventional journalism. So when we see the trends right now in the consumption of media among young people, they obviously lean towards the social media platforms. But the good news is that they also go to the social media platforms to get news. So if we are able to, convey the news through these new platforms, we definitely have an opportunity to also engage with young people. The challenge, of course, the way we see the analysis, that the classic news criteria often animates journalists and reporters to have the negativity bias that Tina was mentioning. So we need to rethink how we do this kind of journalism. But it also means that if we can use some of these tools that we have from the solutions journalism and constructive journalism toolbox, so that is more focused on solutions, that is providing hope, but also giving people, or especially young people, a chance to feel that they actually can do something about the challenges that they're facing. We actually have quite good numbers saying that they will engage with journalism.
Thank you very much, Peter. That's highly interesting, going back to a local level where you have a greater chance to be active on the field. So you can be even more active with your civil society network. Tiziano Bordoni, that's a question to Tina, if you'd like to answer that. So basically what is asked here is that in today's communication, how you pick pictures is of paramount importance. So in your theories for solutions journalism, on top of how you should write and report things, you also have to focus on how you pick the pictures that go with the text.
That is a really great point, and I'm really glad you made it, because the visuals are so important. And they are often the only piece of a news article that people notice. They may not read the article, but they see the headline and they see the visuals. So there are ways to do solutions-focused photography and videography. And we have courses, including on our website, for how to do those. But again, you have to, the point is to get away from what we call the fear factory, to get away from the idea that the way we want to engage our audiences is by arousing fear and anger and horror. If we're trying to promote a different kind of journalism, and one that is more constructive, and I agree with everything Peter is saying. I think that the Constructive Institute is doing fantastic work in taking solutions journalism and surrounding it with the other things that journalism needs to do. Then we have to go for photos and video that are of how people are trying to solve problems, and not just stay in, for example, poverty porn. Poverty porn is a term we have in English, I'm not sure what there is in Italian, that is basically making pornography out of people's bad circumstances. And we don't want to do that. It is taking away their agency. It is othering them, pushing them away from us. And we think that through different kinds of photos and video, we can do better in reporting on problems by focusing on what are people doing to solve them. Peter,
can I add a comment?
Please.
So just a reflection on what Tina is saying. This is also about how the journalism industry, rewards itself. So if you look at imagery, and if you look at, the competitions, like who wins the World Press Photo Award, it's often pictures of dying children in the hands of crying mothers. It's terrible pictures of wars, famines, etc. So sometimes we probably also need to challenge the conventions on how we what kind of journalism we award. So not only a few years ago, a Danish photographer was actually awarded, this was during COVID, for a picture where a woman is able to give a hug to her grandmother through a plastic wall. And this was a picture that also, signaled a lot of hope. This was actually a solution to, in Brazil, where people faced tremendous, horrible conditions. But through this image, you were able to convey much more hope than you would be able to in a text. And this was probably the first example, at least that I know of, where you actually awarded that kind of journalism. And, the top prize was still awarded to, war. So it's also about how the industry, recognizes these kinds of journalism.
So true.
Thank you very much, Peter. Thank you very much, Antina. Andrea Gianbartolomei for his third question. And that's interesting as well, because it underlines a phenomenon which is typical for today's journalism, because, on both websites and social networks, it is all the most difficult to be deontologically active. So how can we distinguish between journalism to core or paid journalism or any other type of communication? We might as well call it adverts. So Jody, you said that if you want to talk to an audience of under 35, you can't just denounce something. You have to offer solutions. Do you think that that type of audience might be sensitive to this approach as well, in terms of deontological approaches, in terms of more coherence, in terms of higher quality?
At the bottom of the screen, Jody, you can press there's an icon where you can choose translation, and then you can choose English, and then you will get a channel with live translation.
That is incredibly helpful. That's super helpful. Thank you so much for sharing that with me. So I'm not exactly sure on the question that was leading into this for me, Stefano, but from the email exchange that we'd had before, we'd spoken about doing a case study and just sharing an example of how we integrate solutions journalism in the work that we do, right? So with that,
I don't think we're quite there yet.
Oh, we're not there yet. No, we're at a question stage. Apologies. Could I ask that the question? I'm so sorry for being difficult. I'm struggling to see whether I've hit the translation, but I'm struggling to see where the text is coming up.
Hi, Jody. Can you hear me now?
Yes. Hello.
Okay, fantastic.
So
You can only
sorry.
hear our voice. No worries whatsoever. You can only hear our voice when somebody is not speaking English. So whenever the floor is speaking English, you will be hearing their voice. And whenever people speak Italian, you will be hearing my voice. So stick to the English channel.
Okay, so okay.
We'll repeat the question for you.
Thank you.
There it goes. So you underlined that the younger audiences are more and more interested in solutions journalism. So they're oriented to solutions journalism.
Yes.
So do you think that we need to go back to a more deontologically speaking, pure or authentic type of journalism without mixing up corporate aspects, pieces of information, reporting on the news, and so on and so forth? What's your take on that?
Okay, and can everyone hear me now if I start answering? Okay, thank you. I'm so sorry for this. So if I understood the question right, it's if they're interested in it, should that be the priority over other forms of journalism? Yeah. Okay, perfect. So I think that engagement, and this goes back to Peter's point, I think engagement as the key metric of driving content is really disruptive. I think it doesn't actually serve the bigger functions that journalism is there to do. So, I was invited to speak at a conference recently about how to engage younger audiences, and they were talking about infinite scroll and all of these other capabilities that media has now to be able to both grab and keep our attention. And for me, it's the wrong question to ask, because when you're purely being driven by engagement, you're losing the intent and nobility and value that you're actually providing through your product. And it's a real hazard. And so a lot of the work that I do, and it's something that I'll speak about in the second section, is around media literacy. So actually educating younger audiences, as well as older audiences as well, about media, about news, about the selection process, and also helping them understand the relationship between input and impact, so that they're empowered to make more informed choices. Because at the moment, the way that our information and media system is built is around engagement. And so we mine human psychology to be able to think what will get their attention and what will keep their attention, and how can I then monetize that attention. And so if we can actually evolve our preferences as consumers, we play an active role in shaping a more healthier information ecosystem. So there's no sort of quick fix to this. There's no silver bullet. There's no should we do this or that. It takes a range of different interventions with a lot of different stakeholders to be able to support and ultimately build a much healthier, empowering, productive, and helpful media environment. And if we're just thinking about engagement as the continuous beacon of success, if that is what success looks like, engagement, we're always going to find ourselves lost. So that's kind of, it's not that we should prioritize it above everything else because that's what the audience is saying, and so we should just do that. But it is about recognizing and listening to your audiences and recognizing that this is something that is of value to them, and it's something that's missing from the current landscape. And there would be huge value in making more space for it. But when we're thinking about it, just there shouldn't be this either or. There shouldn't be this binary competition between different types of content, rather than, solutions or problems is and. Replace or with and just broaden the lens, make it wider, and be more inclusive of different types of storytelling that can ultimately propel society forward. And engagement should be one of many different metrics that indicate success. And as Peter said, how do you internally incentivize news reporting? And that comes through incentives, through rewards and recognition. Obviously outside you've got engagement, but there really needs to be way more metrics of success, and we need a far more educated consumer.
All right, we go back to what you said before in the second round table that starts now, and we deal with experiences and cases of solution journalism just to have some hands-on examples. So as I am a facilitator and director of Vita, may I say 2 words about it? So we're becoming 30 this year, and since its birth in 1994, we have created an alliance between different civil society organizations with a group of journalists, based on the idea that all the stakeholders of civil society, international cooperation, volunteering in hospital, and solutions for the use of public spaces to tell stories from their own angles. So we have had a nice success and duration because, as I said, we've just become 30, but we even denounced problem and solutions alike. So we really wanted to have a constant exchange with the stakeholders, local stakeholders, that were the ones needing to find civil society solutions. So that's why I'm particularly happy to introduce the second roundtable because we've been working on solutions journalism, even if we haven't called it that way since the very beginning. So may I leave the floor to Tina Rosenberg and Assunta Corbo, an Italian journalist active in training in Italy, because we would like to have some examples of solution journalism. So we really want you to share those examples and the way in which this approach is combined with a greater rigor to ensure truth and accuracy in reporting the news. So we're dealing here not only with a negative bias, we're dealing with negative bias balanced with positive news and solutions that will have to be put forward and into practice in real life. So I don't know whether Tina wants to start with Assunta, but you have the floor.
Assunta, go ahead.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon to all the participants. So I was educated on Jodi's works, and so I'm so happy to be here in the same session of Jodi, Tina, and all the others. I could have a fellowship with them, so I've become a certified trainer. That was my possibility to found a network of more than 200 journalists here, consultative network, including Vita, because as Stefano, you were saying, the approach is similar. Oh, I wasn't saying that, said Stefano. But our main goal is to train journalists first and foremost, but also to educate Italian readers and audience. Why so? Because Italian readers do have a strong bias against this kind of journalism. To go back with what Tina and Peter said, so distrust in traditional journalism. So that's why we're working hard. We also have News 48 newspaper where we put into practice the principles of solution journalism, because we want to report not only news but also culture. We want to spread culture, and talking about ethics, on the 12th of June we were at the Journalists Associations with our presidents to understand whether room for constructive journalism can be found in the future within the associations. There are some Italian stories that we have reported in Italy, because Stefano, you were talking about examples, and our example is about unemployment, youth unemployment in the South. So youth that wouldn't like to leave their territory, their hometown, their home region, but they're forced to because they can't find a job. So we told the story of a startup that trained these youth, placed them on the territory, and allowed them to pay training courses that they had attended before. So this is a story we reported based on figures to show why it works well, which part was well handled, and how it could be replicated in other communities. So that's an example that we can also do it in Italy. Can you just tell me the name? News48.it. Why 48? 48 because it's slower than 24. Just to go slower and slower. Tina, you have the floor.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Assunta. It's great to hear about the spread of solutions journalism here in Italy, and I wish you good luck, and let's keep working together. So a lot of journalists can get intimidated by the idea of doing solutions stories, and they feel like, oh my God, I have to set aside 3 months and do a long series, and I can't do that. We know you can't do that, okay? We all get how completely stripped all our newsrooms are of resources, and everybody is struggling now to just get the paper out. So there's many different kinds of solution stories, and you can start with solutions pieces that are very simple. And they may be about some program in your neighborhood, in a neighborhood of your city that has had some success at facing a neighborhood problem. You can do local solution stories that are based on interesting organizations. Here's an organization that has managed to expand mental health treatment so it reaches people who because of their culture, don't normally show their culture disapproves of talking about mental health. And here's a program that's managed to bring them into treatment. That's a good solution story. These are small and easy to do. They can be done quickly. They can be done by tiny little news organizations with staff of 3 people as part of an everyday beat. If you cover a neighborhood, don't just cover what's going wrong in the neighborhood, cover what they're doing to solve their problems. But you can also use it on an issue beat. If you cover education, if you cover health, if you cover environment, you can include stories about what people are doing to solve problems. Then you can do the very big solution stories that look at, start with data. They start with what we call a positive deviant, which means who's doing a better job with the same resources. Normally, when we journalists get hold of a database, we look for the worst performers, and then we pounce on them, gotcha. But with solutions journalism, you also look at the best performer and look at what they're doing that's worked, and what lessons can we find in that? How did they do this? How did they achieve those good results? And what can we learn from that? And that is very often a bigger story that takes more time. So it does not have to be segregated into a special unit like investigative journalism often is. You can do it every day, or you can do it in an in-depth series. Both those kinds of things are very possible with solutions journalism.
Great, thanks, Tina. Peter, I have also the same question for you. So in a case of constructive journalism and solutions that represent the principles of impartiality and independence, so the foundations of our ethics, our journalists. Please, you have the floor.
Thank you so much. And actually, so I was thinking, so how would I find like a really good story that represents all of this with impartiality, independence, and etc. And actually, what I want to encourage is that you either go and look on our website. We have a best practice portal. If you are particularly focused on solutions journalism stories, I strongly encourage that you visit the Solutions Journalism Network. Tina and her colleagues have put together an extremely rich database of stories that will give you enough inspiration for the rest of your careers. So what I actually want to do instead is try and share one of the reasons that we talk a lot about ethical norms and guidelines for journalism more than the individual stories. So I'll just quickly share my screen again here, because I actually have a few points that I want to make. So I hope you can all again see my screen here. So this is actually a picture just from down the street where I live. Can you all see the screen? You see the wrong screen. You don't see a picture of my street? Oh, you see all the slides, or you see? Okay. Yeah. So I guess you can see it now, right? Yeah. So we'll just do it like this. So this.
What city is it?
So this is the city of Aarhus in Denmark, where I live, and this is just down the street. On the sign, it says "Nuclear, no thank you." The reason I'm showing this sign is because 30, 40 years ago, we had a huge discussion about nuclear energy in Denmark. And it turned out that the people who opposed nuclear energy, they won the narrative. They won the storytelling. So why am I telling this story? Well, the effect is that today, if you want to have a discussion about nuclear energy in the mix of our energy sources, it's almost impossible. We have no nuclear energy in Denmark, and we never will have. So I'm not a proponent of nuclear energy by any stretch. Actually, I don't have an opinion on nuclear energy. But the problem is that the narrative have been extremely one-sided, and you can't have a serious political discussion. So when you talk about impartiality and about independence, there is actually only one power institution in society that needs to be clearly impartial and independent, and that's journalism. The only part that journalism needs to take is the part of the audience. So where this becomes extremely important once again is in the field of climate journalism. So climate is, on the top of everybody's list. We'll be looking forward to another COP. And we know how much storytelling means, right? We all know Greta Thunberg. She said the house is on fire and you need to act. We also know that the way we depict climate change in the news has a huge impact. These are a lot of the things that Jody was also talking about. And luckily, if you remember some of the statistics we've been talking about, we also know how to fix it. So what we did, and the reason I'm mentioning this climate change, is that we need to acknowledge that this is not something that constructive journalism or solutions journalism can just fix. The narrative will be there. And we cannot think that just because you are using constructive or solutions journalism, you are automatically impartial. But constructive journalism and climate journalism is a really, really interesting example, because what has been one of the main problems with climate journalism is that one of the, traditional ideas of impartiality is that we need to hear both sides. And in many, many cases, that is also the true answer. But for example, for climate journalism, for many years, there has been a false balance, a false equivalency. So it's extremely important that we try to listen to the science. It's important that we don't think that we need to only talk about the problems and the conflicts and the famines and the flooding, but that we also say that journalism can be part of promoting hope. And then when we have these extremely complex topics where a lot of parties with anything but independence, they are trying to tell you that this is way too complex and there's not a simple solution, then it's the role of journalism to keep it simple and try to make it relatable. So this is all about human stories. So this is not just about what happens in the US and what all of the big oil companies are doing. We need to bring it down to a scale that's really, really relatable to people. And that's why I think that constructive and solutions journalism hold a part of the answer. But we just cannot tell ourselves that just because you use these kind of things, these kind of approaches, that we then don't risk being impartial. But it does give you a lot of ideas and a lot of tools on how to work with this kind of thing. And I think the case of climate science, where we say we can't have a false balance, that's a really good example of where we can apply these kind of tools to get a more nuanced debate. I'll stop talking so we have more time for questions.
That's great, thank you. Jody, may I ask you a further example, a story of solutions journalism that could increase the trust in the audience and in the readers? Do you have such an example to tell us?
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't necessarily pick one story. I would say it's, you know, it's all of the stories. It's access to a different narrative that really builds that trust. Something that I wanted to share as my case study, something that I realized, whilst engagement is such a huge part of the guiding sort of decision making around what content is produced, really we need an educated consumer. If our preferences change, the industry changes. It's a slightly slower game plan, but it's an effective one, because any industry that's gone through a sustained shift towards a more positive purpose has relied on a conscious consumer. So that's very much where I see my role as being. And one of the interventions that I did recently was build a curriculum, build a news literacy curriculum, because at the moment, news literacy is very much around fake news. So the sort of, if I was to simplify it in a very reductive way, it would be that fake news is bad, real news is good. That's essentially what is taught when people are teaching young people around news literacy. And because of the work that I do and the work that we've talked about in this course today, we know that's not true. We know that fake news is not the only contributor to a misinformed worldview, and the negativity bias is a huge contributor to us being both misinformed and disempowered. So I wanted to create a curriculum that integrated teaching young people. If we're teaching them about political bias, we should be teaching them about negativity bias. And what I began my course with the students, I asked them, I will explain to them, I say, we're going to cover 3 main questions in our time together. We're going to talk about what is the news, why do we have it, and how do we use it? But before we answer any of those questions, I want to ask you a different question, which is, how does the news make you feel? And their responses that they came back with me, bear in mind, they're 16-year-olds. And we hadn't spoken about the negativity bias at this point. That was how I introduced the course. How does the news make you feel? And their answers were depressed, scared, anxious, worried, fearful, jaded, cynical. We created a sort of word cloud of all of these. And it was unanimous, really, the same things among 3 cohorts of different students. And we went through this process of education. So it was a 5-module series, and we looked at sort of various aspects of becoming reliably informed. We looked at journalism when it's done well, and we discussed whether or not the principles of journalism are met in practice. And we looked at some of the other informational hazards, and we looked at human psychology, and we looked at bias. Within those sessions, in between each one, students were tasked with the activity of selecting 3 solutions-focused news stories that they cared about from some predetermined resources that I provided them with, 3 solutions-focused news stories, and tell me why they picked them, why they mattered, and how it made them feel. And what was incredible was the responses that came after we did this intervention for 5 weeks. Because when we then spoke about sort of how the news made them feel, it was hopeful, energized, excited, empowered, capable. Again, we've got another word cloud. You can download all of this, by the way. If you go onto News Literacy Lab website, there's an impact report from this intervention that we did with the students. And we ended up calling it Navigating News, Nurturing Hope, because hope was one of the biggest things that was activated amongst the students from interacting with these types of stories, as well as being educated on the media industry more generally. And when you sort of look deeply into it, or when you go back to the research, especially around hope and civic engagement, it's a critical psychological ingredient for action. And I know I spoke about this in my talk before. And so it just shows the value that can be attached from learning about the world in a different way. And Peter mentioned climate change. We actually ended up doing a whole page on climate change, because climate change is the issue that young people were concerned about the most from the cohorts of students that I was teaching. And it became the area they became most empowered and not excited by, that's the wrong word, but felt able to actually affect change in this huge area of their lives, which before they felt like they might not have been able to. And so it just shows the power of transforming the story ignites a transformation from within us too. And that's a really powerful takeaway. So I think that, you know, when we're thinking about solutions journalism, it's not one story. It's the environment that you put yourself in as a reader, as a consumer, how you become informed about the world, and how that then inspires your own sense of activity or action, and whether or not it even does, or whether it extinguishes the flame before you've even gotten going. And the problem with negativity bias is unfortunately, even though it makes us aware, it creates barriers to us being able to care. So that's kind of the big takeaway from my experience with solutions journalism from a teaching perspective of what does it do when we actually include solutions into our media diet, and how does that help us not just become reliably informed about the world, but empowered to act within it too.
May I make a comment?
Of course.
Thank you. I mean, from the point of view of climate denialism and climate doomism are the same thing.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter if you deny that climate change exists, or you just are so paralyzed by it that you decide to do nothing. That's the same impact on climate. It doesn't care. So it's very, very important to report on climate in a different way, one that offers hope, but hope with teeth. You don't want, a lot of journalists are afraid to do stories that are solutions focused, because they feel like, first of all, I don't want to give false hope. And second of all, I don't want to give the impression that the problem is solved. Believe me, nobody's going to think the problem is solved. And you can do stories on small things. Don't take on all of climate change. There are no solutions to all of climate change. Every problem is made up of dozens and dozens of smaller slices, all of which are important, and all of which have solutions associated with them that you can report on. But climate is really the issue where this is most absolutely crucial, because what we have been doing is just driving people to inaction, and we don't have that luxury anymore.
Yeah, absolutely. And just to pull one of the quotes that one of the students said, he said it was good to see a more solutions-based news article rather than one just discussing all the negativity surrounding the environment at the moment. If people read more positive news about environment, it might encourage them to support the cause rather than just feel defeated by it. And that's really the thing. It's a transferring of agency, right? So I mentioned this again before, but when you witness victimization continuously, when you witness destruction, despair, helplessness, it's contagious. And the reverse is true as well. When you see people taking effective action, it doesn't have to solve everything, but it is solving something, and it's doing something about something, and it's showing actually actions matter, and that there is effective solutions that can be implemented and can lead to results. That also transfers. It's contagious in the other direction as well. So it's being able to witness agency, to be able to ignite it internally within ourselves too. And as Tina said, this isn't about chasing stories of hope. Hope is a byproduct. Hope isn't the focus that you go after. It's not saying we need hope. How can we find it? We need truth. We need accuracy. We need evidence of what reality looks like. And when we do that, you'll get hope, because the reality is the story of humanity, at least for the last millennia, has been one of progress. It hasn't been one of failure. And actually, if you look at the media and you just inform yourself through the news, you do have a really misinformed worldview. And so actually, you're not saying, oh, everyone's really depressed, we need hope. You're not chasing the feelings. The feelings are the byproduct of the truth. The fact is, at the moment, we are limiting the truth that we are telling people about the condition of the world today and what we can do about it.
Well,
Thank you, Tina and Jody, for your interesting intervention. Alessia, may I ask you, as an observer, could you find an example of solutions journalism, and not only in Italy, but also abroad? You said it before, we need journalism because we needed to spread word about our impact economy activities, this new way of making business. Is there any example you'd like to make?
So, as Jody was saying, I would like to touch upon a few things, and then I will give you a couple of links, if you will. So when we started off under a different name, we were still doing research, and we understood that we had to tackle the so-called practical cases, which is not maybe the best possible way to define it, but it's the way we wanted to identify the who in our case, who did what, and how can I best interpret the mechanisms, which are the underlying mechanisms. I mean, before moving on to talking about the so-called success stories, and we reported on them, and we created a series about those success stories, but then we were trapped. As Tina said, it felt like we wanted to celebrate those successes. We were obsessed with those successes. Therefore, we changed the way we talk about those practical cases to identify those who are part of our community, so social companies, financiers, and so on and so forth. So anyone who might help us to implement those solutions at a social and environmental level, we decided to call them impact stories. And that is quite connected to impact journalism. Therefore, we tried to change our approach towards those practical cases. So today, we'd like to talk about those cases throughout our podcast as well, to tell you more about who actually deals with those cases, who are the people doing the hard work, behind the scenes to convey this message of change. We are a network which deals with positive change. Therefore, we'd like to find the best possible way to talk about all of this. We're not journalists. We're not part of the academia either. So I'd like to quote the 3 main magazines Europe-wide with which we work that convey those stories, and I shall post the links into the chat. Pioneers Post, Impact Investor, and the Alliance magazine. These are the 3 reference points that we have in our industry that report on those stories and the solutions that were found, with an idea of inspiring and replicating them. So the last thing I wanted to underline is the following. The Pioneers Post did something new. So they created a social business award in the UK, and that's another way to actually underline even more the solutions, the organizations thereof, with this idea that has already been stressed by Tina and Jody. So how can we create this general positive impact? How can this be replicated elsewhere? So healthcare, climate change, social issues in general. And we can see how the different solutions have been implemented, and successfully so, in a number of regions. And that's the greatest service that journalists can actually offer all the communities that we're active in, because as we've said, mine is a niche industry, but it can really push this shift at a financial and economical level, as well as in terms of narrative. So let's not just focus on issues, on challenges, of problems, but also on the solutions that have worked elsewhere in the world and Europe-wide. That would be all. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for being that quick as well. Yes, you have now left enough time for the questions. Tina, a question to you from Maria Vittoria. That's quite interesting. Maria Vittoria has just actually launched her digital newspaper. Can we actually count on solutions journalism? Shall I utilize solutions journalism for my newspaper? And how can I find a way to create a community of an engaged audience for this my new adventure? For this new adventure of mine. So all the best to her. And what would you suggest, Tina?
I love that question. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And Asunta's probably sitting there beaming, going, call me, call me. This is great. And congratulations to you for starting a new newspaper. You're a brave woman, let me tell you. I don't know what your focus is, but almost any focus you can include solutions journalism and include it from the start and tell people that you're doing it and ask for their help. Engagement, which I know Jody criticizes engagement. To me, engagement is a word that includes building a community. And that's what you want to do with your journalism. You want to make people feel a part of this, and you want to make them a part of it. It's not just how they feel. So you can bring them in the beginning. You can have an advisory council of citizens to talk about solutions. You can ask people to send in ideas for what do they think solutions are to their problems? What's going on in their neighborhoods that's worth reporting on? It's not just a question of engaging them after you publish. It's a question of engaging them beforehand as well as part of the reporting process. And then afterwards, you can be useful to your community with your solutions journalism engagement. For example, another organization that reported on infant mortality, which is a big problem in the United States, had a community baby shower after they published. And they had booths, they had lines around the block. They had a whole fair of different organizations offering services, and they gave away baby boxes for babies to sleep safely in. So they didn't, to lower the danger of children dying in their sleep in their very early days. And that was, the community is still talking about that. It was useful to the community. And that is something that can come out of your solutions journalism. And that's a way to really make yourself indispensable, make yourself a real part of your community. And that's what you want to do. Peter, you had something you wanted to say?
Yeah, so I completely agree. And just a few ideas on how you could also support this approach. So a couple of media outlets that have been very, very successful, they even talk about their audience as members that are sort of co-creating the news. Something you will know them as the correspondent from the Netherlands. And we have a sort of almost a sister organization called Zetland here in Denmark. So I would look those organizations up. There are also tools out there that offer exactly what Tina is saying to support it for media outlets. There's an organization called Hearken, where you can do exactly what Tina is mentioning. So you will be able to integrate that into your news product, where you allow people to ask the questions. You know, journalists have the exact same, biases that we all do as people. So they will be interested in specific fields. So if you ask and include the questions from the audience, you might find new interesting angles. And there are actually tools out there for that. So I'm sure that Tina will have some of those ready available in some of their workshops, but also some you can even buy off the shelf.
Thank you. I also wanted to mention that we do have instructional material on our website in Italian. Our basic course, Solutions Journalism 101. If you go to our website, which is solutionsjournalism.org, and you go to Learning Lab, you can find interactive courses in, I think, 15 different languages right now, and Italian, of course, is one of them. and that can get you started. Jody.
I just wanted to, because I know I've maybe overemphasized my frustration with engagement. And I just wanted to clarify on that a tiny bit, because it's not necessarily, I totally agree. I think it's about building community, and you have to be able to engage your audiences to be able to help them to understand and care. My issue is engagement for engagement's sake, as if engagement is the result of engagement. And in the same way that when, one of my frustrations with media literacy education is truth can sometimes be the end goal for truth's sake. Whereas my thing to both of them is, what does that ultimately serve, right? So if we're seeking truth, for what purpose? What does it enable us to do? And if we're seeking engagement, why? What's the service that's being created to both earn that engagement, but also what can that then create and lead to? So I think my frustration, when I go to journalism conferences, especially, and they're talking about engagement and growth, the success metric of engagement and growth is engagement and growth, and then potentially monetization. And so I'm just feeding it back into a bigger purpose of the why. Why do we want more engagement? What is the impact that ultimately leads to? And how can you make sure that you're serving your audience as a result, rather than them being used to serve your metrics? How can you make sure that you're adding value to their lives too? So a slight clarification on it. I think the just to recognize that engagement is hugely important, provided that we're providing something of value to be exchanged for engagement.
I also wanted to make one other point, which is solutions journalism is the best way to cover communities that have been marginalized, and a community that feels like it has not been covered well by the media, and everyone feels that way, responds very well to coverage of what they're doing to solve problems. Many communities are accustomed to being covered only as perpetrators or victims, and they don't like either of those things. People want to have what they're doing, their agency, acknowledged and highlighted and spread. And if you can do stories about that, real journalism, as we said, recognizing the limitations, but real stories, builds your community. Sorry.
Sorry, we have a few questions. You're a fantastic team, and you're actually managing, to leave the floor to one another on your own. But there is another interesting question. Let's pick Lara, for instance, stating, Jody and all of you talked about training, both for the audience and for the journalist. But she also says, can solutions journalism actually survive without the publishers? Shouldn't they be involved? Because that might play a role at a worldwide level, So who are the owners of the different newspapers? Will they have to be convinced, or can they be convinced at all? That actually we should stick to solutions journalism, that solution journalism is the way to go, if you will. I don't know if I've made myself understood with the question.
Can I give a suggestion, at least to a reply? So I will say this is probably one of the things we are most focused on right now, if I understand the question correctly. So we've had a wonderful conversation about how this Jody has really been a champion on how this affects the users. Tina is an experienced, seasoned, renowned journalist herself. So what's happening in the newsroom? But I think it is extremely crucial that we also talk about, business models, right? So one thing that we have been focused on is, how do we actually convince people that this is a good business model? Jody, you were hinting at it a while ago. This is also about challenging the conventional KPIs, right? So we don't want to do engagement for the sake of engagement. We want to do engagement because we want to reach the communities affected. The problem is that it doesn't always translate into a good business model. But I will say we have been doing a lot of experimentation, both on the research side, where we have done a lot of surveys, and there is definitely a demand for this kind of journalism, which is also supported from what the Reuters Institute reports say. We've also been conducting experiments where we expose people to different kinds of journalism. And at least in experiments, they do pivot towards constructive and solutions journalism. But most importantly, what we have found recently, we have developed an AI tool, a language model that is able to identify constructive journalism. I'll really quickly share a slide, and then you won't see any more of all of my slides. I hope you can see this. This is a tool that can measure the journalism output of a media outlet. These are just numbers, but the important thing is that if we measure do analysis, this is from a big Nordic public service provider. I can't reveal who. We have gone through 1,000 of their articles, and you can see here, this is the performance in terms of clicks. This is the performance in terms of reading time, and this is the performance in terms of satisfied readers. So on all of these parameters, it actually shows that constructive journalism is now able to outcompete conventional journalism, particularly in certain subfields. So I think the myth that if it bleeds, it leads needs to be challenged. Surely clickbait still works, sensationalism still has an effect, negativity has an effect, but we know that we can change this narrative.
Fantastic, Peter. Thank you. Assunta, I saw you had raised your hand about the national landscape, the Italian landscape. Yes, I wanted to tell you something more about it because we have been experiencing a little bit of delay from this viewpoint. We've tried to spur this dialogue with the main Italian publishers, which is quite complex objectively due to business logics. But in Italy, we have seen quite a few independent newspapers coming up that have this type of sensitivity. So they are quite close to solution journalism approaches. So with the Constructive Network, we have been working on individuals mainly, so single professionals, the single journalists who write for bigger newspapers and magazines as well. That means that those journalists will change their approach and actually utilize that when working with big names, so that the service which is put forth follows those principles as foundations. So this is what has been happening in the Italian market. So you might find that interesting since we have quite a few Italian colleagues here. Peter, a question to you. Well, Alessia should have asked that, but I'll do that. How do we measure social impact? Alessia will know. Are there any criteria to measure the social impact of journalism? Do you have a grid or do you have a table at all?
I think it's a very difficult question. I know there are organizations in the US where they measure social impact. Again, I think the criteria are if you reach the communities affected. So if you write about climate change in the global south, will that be a story for well-off people in the north or in the west, or will it actually reach the communities affected? I think maybe some of the things that Jody have been working on, I think maybe will be closer to answer that question, because I know she has some opinions on how you actually make the right people talk about the journalism that affects them. So I don't know if there are any good KPIs. Like, we are now able to measure constructive journalism. And I also know that you have, I don't know if she's been on the speaker list, but Lindsay Green Barber, there's a company in the US called Impact Architects. They do very interesting work, also with some huge media outlets, on how you can actually measure this social impact. But maybe Jody, you have some good cases.
Well, I was going to say, I was on a panel at INMA last month with a speaker called Ben, I forget his surname, but he's the editor of Stuff in Australia, which is a news organization, and they've just put a KPI in themselves to be able to measure how their product makes their audience feel. So when they're asking for feedback on their audiences, they actually have a rating that they've now introduced to get feedback on about how the product impacts their audience and how it makes them feel. And I thought that was awesome, because obviously that's a lot of what I'm interested in, and actually putting it there to show the value, not only that the content provides in terms of information, but how it actually makes their audience feel. And I love that. I thought that was a really neat way to actually begin introducing KPIs in a new way. And it gives them something to be able to talk about with credibility about their product and learn about their audience better. So that was good. That's the only example that I have in terms of, yeah, in terms of alternative KPIs that I was introduced to recently. But I thought it was worth sharing because it was a good one.
Fantastic, fantastic. Thank you very much, Jody. Let me double check whether we have any other question. We only have a couple of minutes left. We have one. The idea that social journalism is a militant type of journalism, is that true? So she said, solutions journalism is somehow masking some of traditional journalism constructions of everything we've always believed in. That's the type of journalism that dismantles some preconceptions, I imagine. It will destructure a certain type of narrative. So can you actually define solutions journalism as a militant type of journalism from this perspective? Pisa, Tina?
I'm not sure what the word militant means in this context. Could you explain that, please?
Yes, I actually interpreted a question that was asked by somebody else in the audience. So I believe that might be a type of journalism which is anti-system, if you will, or partially so. A type of journalism which is not traditional, that is actually evolving and moving away from an expression of the status quo or the big powers or the big owners of the magazines. Maybe that's something that we deal with in Italy, because most of our publishers are an expression of a legitimate power, and yet a type of power which is connected to big names. Therefore we might have a different perception from this viewpoint on the two sides of the oceans. So I don't know.
But I think maybe one of the things that, at least one thing that the person asking the question could be addressing is the question of activism. And I can say pretty categorically, from our point of view, activism is not something that you want to aspire to. We still need to aspire to be objective. I know that that's easier said than done when you are in Italy, where you have a sometimes very populist government, then you have a technocrat government. Especially for Tina and her colleagues in the US, of course, there are some places where or some areas where it's almost impossible not to have some kind of, or take sides on an issue. But to the extent possible, avoid activism, because it muddies the waters and it becomes difficult for the audience to have trust in your impartiality.
I think solutions journalism done right follows the rules of traditional journalism in the sense of fairness and accuracy and not promoting a point of view. In many other ways, it is sort of revolutionary, but not in that one.
I also think I just wanted to add on something that I've noticed over the years is solutions journalism, and I think it's potentially reflected in this question, is treated like an other. Like there is journalism, and then there's this other thing called solutions journalism that's disrupting or potentially disrupting the delivery of news. And I just want to counter that. If I'm understanding the question right, it is still traditional journalism. It still meets all of the same fundamental objectives of journalism. So, for example, one of the big ones of being able to hold power to account, for example, solutions journalism can be an incredibly effective way to do that, because it makes problems that are become kind of accepted, you know, systemic problems that become so intractable in a way, that become so accepted. When you see progress taking place, either within your own community or from somewhere else that's facing the same issue that you are, and they're making progress in it, it makes that problem that seemed endless, it actually makes it unacceptable anymore, because we know that with the right resources, with the right approach, with the right political will, with the right community, with the right incentives, whatever it was that made that effective, we know that progress can be made. So it puts a huge amount of pressure on your own community, on your own government, on your own business people, whoever it is that needs to show up to solve this problem, puts an enormous pressure on them to actually say, well, it is solvable, so why aren't we? So solutions journalism, it's not a softening, it's not a evolution or revolution of journalism. It's an additional tool to be able to meet the fundamental principles of journalism. It is not changing the principles of journalism. It's giving you more tools to be able to be effective in actually realizing them.
I think sometimes a good analogy that you can use is back in the 60s, 70s, you had the emergence of investigative reporting. So, you know, we had the Watergate scandal. Everybody wanted to be an investigative reporter, wanted to be Carl Bernstein. And what happened then in the journalism schools and in the journalism communities was that you built a vocabulary around investigative reporting. So it's not that people didn't do investigative reporting before, but it just became sort of a new trend. And that's why it's so wonderful. I mean, we do conferences, workshops and stuff all over the world. And I don't think we've done a conference without having either or both Tina and Jody there, because we are part of a bigger movement that is starting to build a vocabulary around constructive journalism, solutions journalism, constructive journalism. You know, we call it many names, but it's part of the same movement. And the idea is not to revolutionize or throw the old thing out. The idea is to build, you know, systems, methodologies, words, so people can talk about journalism and quality and impact in new ways.
Right, it's great. It was extremely fruitful. I learned so many things that we could also use here at Vita. So thanks, Tina, thanks, Peter, thanks, Jody, and of course, Assunta and Alessia. May I just share a QR code with everybody just to evaluate our webinar? Please look in the chat, because I'm going to share it there. And put it on the screen. Okay, can you just put a thumb up if you can see it? All right, great. So that's the QR code you should flash just to give us a feedback and your evaluation on today's webinar. One more thing then, as we said at the beginning, this is just the dawn of a series of meetings. There are so many other webinars scheduled for September, October, and November. So for further information on the further sessions and on the materials of today's sessions, will be sent at the soonest via email. So having said that, I thank you for your participation. I thank the speakers for their time. And oh, yes. Oh, Carlos says he's got the, oh, Rafael says he's got the dates for the next webinars. So please, Rafael, share the agenda. We can't see them yet. Okay, may I just share them in the chat, maybe? Okay, so why don't you just read them while sharing them? So there will be more technical sessions, just an overview. We have economic sustainability of impact journalism on the 18th of November. sorry. So let's start from the beginning. Metrics of social impact journalism, that's what Peter and Jody were talking about. So the tools you can use to measure impact of news. It's scheduled for the 16th of September from 2 to 4 p.m. Then the next one, stories that can make the difference, so case studies on the 21st of October from 2 to 4 p.m. And lastly, economic sustainability of impact journalism on the 18th of November from 2 to 4. So we will be dealing with business models for impact journalism. So may I thank our distinguished guests for today's session. That was hugely interesting. So may I suggest to all participants to have a look at the website by Tina Rosenberg, Social Journalism Impact, because that contains a tool that can be paramount. So a huge database of thousands of solutions that were found to small and big stories. So climate change, holes in the streets, and any kind of problems that municipalities and countries have to deal with locally and nationwide. So that database is crucial because you can see what happens in other countries, in other cities. You can see solutions. And that's where your solution journalist journey can start. So of course it may sound easy, it's nothing like that. It's very complex. And in my opinion, it's a sort of second step of investigative journalism, because you're not only investigating the problems, you're also trying to find the solutions that were put forward, and that's what brings you closer to consumers and audience, of course. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you, and thanks for your time and participation. Bye-bye.
Thank you.